But like, have you experienced any backlash? Like on people saying like, how can you tell people to eat meat, or any of the sort of kickback from what your message is?
I don't get any real sort of, you get people, some trolls, etc. I think the biggest thing that I get is to do with fat and cholesterol,
Mm,
um, and I think that scares a lot of people, and rightly so. And I don't mean that in a good sense. Rightly so, because that's how they've been programmed. That's the
mm,
information they've been given from the top down by the governments, by the medical profession, by their doctor, etc., etc., etc. So when they see someone, who's eating, I had it today. What did I cook? What did I cooked some rump steak and some a burger, and I was basting it with a whole load of butter.
mm,
That's what I had. That's what I had. And then someone said, "Yeah, but butter," and I said, "Butter is good for everything. Butter makes everything taste better."
mm.
And they put, "But it makes you fat." And then I said, and I wasn't going to reply, and
Yeah.
then I just said, "But I'm not fat." So
Yeah.
it's and cholesterol and saturated fat. I mean, there's so much information of the benefits and why it isn't bad for
Mm,
you,
mm,
etc., etc. And I'm not a doctor. I mean, I'm not going to go down that route. And I was saying to Dr. Chafee when we were having our chat, a few weeks ago, if people were still, look at me and they would listen to me, and whatever I say, yeah, but okay, here's a study. This is blah
mm,
blah blah. Yeah, but Mike, you're not a doctor. But Mike, you're not a
mm,
PhD. Even though I think I'm quite a good example of living this lifestyle,
mm,
they still won't listen to me because I don't have that the letters after my name, etc.,
mm,
etc., etc., etc. That helps to validate, that. So I don't go down that route.
mm,
So I just say, well, find me another 58. I'll be 59 in January.
mm,
Find me someone else like me.
mm. There's,
Sure, there's going to be a few,
mm,
sure,
yeah.
but
Well, the guys like you are also on the similar diet. They're on a
yeah,
similar diet and they're training.
yeah,
Like these people who are like, Mark Sisson and some of these other big names who are like low carb and are just in great shape.
yeah,
And they're
yeah,
they're coming into their, late 50s, 60s, some 70s. I don't know how old Mark Sisson is. I think he's 65 or so. Just like
yeah,
ripped, in
yeah,
great shape. And
yeah,
like but if you listen to like many of the doctors out there, and it's the appeal to authority, isn't it? It's like, oh, well, this doctor said this and you're not a doctor. So like, what do you know? But it's
yeah,
like, you're living it. It's experience. This is working for me. And many of the doctors you see who are talking about like high carb, like high grains diet, they're in terrible shape. Like they're in
yeah,
really bad shape. They couldn't lift 5 kilos, let alone actually be out there training. But they're doing this. We don't have to go down this route, but like this industry funded research and everything in between, like there's so many conflicts of interest. Like your only interest is being as healthy as you can and spreading a health message to people and giving people good quality retreats where they can feel healthy and like understand carnivore. There's not much of a conflict of interest there. Whereas like someone who's being funded and paid to push a particular message, that's a lot of conflict of interest.
my I don't want to end up like my parents. They both have severe dementia. My dad has even horrific, horrifically severe dementia. He's disabled through a stroke. Has countless, obviously diabetic, etc., 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 etc. Had bypass, heart bypass, 40, 30, 40
Mm,
years ago. Um, I don't want to end up like them. I
mm,
don't want to end up being not just like, a burden or anything like. I don't want to have a shit life because his life is shit.
mm,
I don't want to have. I want every day to think like, this is fucking great. Okay, it's great. It's great. It's raining, etc., etc. But it's like I want to feel good.
mm,
I want to feel in charge. I want to feel that I have sovereignty over what I do. I'm making my own choices about what I do, how I feel, etc., etc. I don't want to be beholden or under the thumb of a doctor. You said, "Oh yeah, you better have a statin. You better have this. You better we'll write you out a script for this." You know, that's it's because I don't want to be how they've ended up, and how many others are going to end up. And you just need to look around. I say, I say kids because they are to me people in their 20s and 30s who are in bad shape. I'm not talking about people in America, but people over here, and you're just thinking, well, it's not going to get any better for them, and we're sitting on a time bomb, a National Health Service time bomb for all these people who rather save the planet than save themselves.
I think we're watching it explode in real time, to be honest. Like the huge waiting list, people accept that when they get to that, like people accept that they've peaked after like 25. They'll just go like, oh, well, I'm getting older, like my joints are gonna hurt, blah blah blah. And it just doesn't have to be like that. People like you're an example of someone who just goes on and is training hard and is like is feeling fit the whole time. So like what were your parents' diets and lifestyles?
Well, I mean, my dad always had a problem with food, and I remember back in when I was growing up, he used to have a private doctor, who used to come around on a Sunday, and obviously he's dead now, unless he'd probably be 200 if he was still alive. Called Dr. Stone. He had his little medical bag, little black leather bag. He used to write my father out prescriptions each week. And what he used to give my dad, because my dad had a problem with eating, was he used to prescribe him with Durafet. And Durafet is an amphetamine. People used to sell them. They used to be called black bombers. So obviously similar like to Purple Hearts in America. And that was his doctor. Not saying they didn't know anything about.
Take away appetite.
Yeah. But it just made him sort of like, and then the flip side of that, well, to bring you down, you've got to have that, and then
sleeping pills and everything else.
Pills, the whole lot, and that unfortunately was how he ended up living for 40 years, and he's 90, mum's 94, and it's rather than being told, okay, or put you on some sort of, they didn't know anything. That's the thing. They didn't know. When he had his bypass, instead of saying, look, Harry, why don't you go on this type of diet or something like that, and we can sort of avoid surgery. We try and heal it that way. No, we'll bypass. Your artery is clogged up. Instead of like working out why it's clogged up and what we can do with that, we just bypass it. And we'll cut you up. And all the negative effects that happens. We'll cut you up. We'll bypass it, but we won't give you any information on how to avoid that and how to. That's it. The crazy. Surgeon gets paid. He's happy because he's done his job.
There's a whole industry around it.
It's just it's just fucked up.
Yeah.
And just, I suppose, one of my, something not that I taught myself, it's just something that I realized from a very early age was like, I'm just going to keep quiet here about if ever I get ill or not. And I've got a genetic heart defect. And when I was a kid, I used to have these palpitations. So my heart, I'd be sitting down and my heart would just go racing. It was like, I remember like being in a chair and just thinking like, fuck, what's going on? And I was too scared to say anything to anyone because I didn't want any type of fuss, or I didn't. I knew what was happening with mum and dad. Anyway, cut a long story short, quite a long story. I went to see a heart specialist. This was probably about 30 years ago, and they said, you've got this syndrome called Wolff Parkinson White. You've got an extra connection in your heart, and it just loops. And then the only way to treat it was open heart surgery. So I just said, okay, well, I've lived with it for so long. I'll just carry on. If I'd said something when I was a kid at 8 years old, Mum, my heart's going like this, they would have put me in a thing, they would have opened me up and what have you. Eventually, when did I have it done? In 2009, I had it done because the procedure was they put a laser, they put a thing through the artery or vein in your leg, and it lasers it out.
Wow. I'd say far less invasive.
Yeah. So by keeping my mouth shut, and I suppose that's my mindset with pain, and I'll just deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got onto that, but that's where my mindset has come from.
That we got onto that was because, you know, the surgeons just wanting to get their job done. We don't want to change stuff with diet and exercise, and like everyone's very quick to just get people into sort of surgery or get people onto a medication and try and have a quick fix. And often the quick fix is actually not a quick fix. It's just the start of the conveyor belt to constant medication or constant doctor involvement. So and I remember you mentioning on Dr. Anthony Chaffee's podcast about you trying to help your mum with I think it was diabetes or so, or going in and you know, giving her good advice, of which she then followed, and then going back into the nurse's office and the nurse saying, oh no, I wouldn't do that. You know, so and being told by a nurse who was sort of not healthy, I'll put it that way.
No, she was fat. She was an obese nurse. Here's the evidence. Someone is doing this and they're feeling much, much better, and all the markers are positive. That's the evidence. But it doesn't fit with your program, so it's not good. Go back to what you were doing. Right. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, I would advise anyone listening to this would go and listen to that story in full on Dr. Anthony Chaffee's podcast. But